Good morning and welcome to the CMA Studio Summer Session. My name is Joyce Beyer and I'm happy to be here this morning to give you the inside scoop on some of the music being played by the Belin Quartet this week. This is going to be extra fun because a lot of the music was actually picked out by you, the audience. So if you have any questions as we're going along, feel free to put them in the comments section. You can also tag friends there to make sure that they see this video. And then be sure to stick around after the fact because I'll tell you a little bit more about how you can win some free tickets to a CMA concert this season. So if you're ready, I'm ready. Let's get going.
All right, week 7. And of course, we're going to start off by talking about today's goals. Goal number 1, by the end of today, I want you to be able to say, I can describe the difference between classical and popular music. Goal number 2, by the end of today, I want you to be able to say, I can compare and contrast composers Vivaldi, Bizet, and Gershwin. Now, the music this week that you're going to hear the Belin Quartet play is a little bit different from other weeks because it was picked out by the audience. So there's a lot of variety in what's being played, both in like how it sounds, who composed it, but also whether it's classical or popular music. And I think that's really awesome that we get to see such a high-level group play so many different kinds of pieces of music. So what I want to do to start off is talk about that first goal. What is the difference between classical and popular? So let's start off with classical. What is classical music? Now, this term is really broad, and I'm going to acknowledge right at the beginning, my definition also very broad. I just want to talk about the basic differences and similarities. So classical music was kind of created as an expression of art, and one of the big things that makes classical music is the fact that it follows the traditions that were set in place by Western culture and styles. There's a bunch of different eras within classical music. So when you hear someone talking about classical music, they're not just talking about like a really small chunk of time. They're talking about Baroque or the actual classical era or Romantic music or 20th century. And there also are a bunch of different styles within that too, whether it's a string quartet, a symphony, songs, operas. The term classical music is really, really broad, but they're all based on what ended up being very traditional to Western Europe and the people who first started writing music there. Now, when we go over to what is popular music, the thing that makes popular music a little bit different is the fact that it was created with the intention of reaching a lot of people, and it was created so that the general population would like it. So it was popular. Normally, it was shared with really big audiences, and it was shared by like the music industry. The music industry helped make it popular, share it on radio, record it. And even within this popular music genre, though, there's still a lot of different subgenres. So there's rock, there's pop, there's K-pop, there's rap, all sorts of things fit under what is popular music. So let's talk a little bit about how those two are the same, because I think sometimes we get in our head, oh, I only like classical music, or oh, I only like popular music. And the truth is, both of those terms are so broad, so big, you probably like a lot of things that are both. So both of these types of music, they describe a ton of different little categories of music. They both can have styles where you have someone singing. I know for a lot of people, they like to listen to things that have words. That makes it more interesting. There are classical pieces of music that have words. There are popular pieces of music that have words. Another thing that's true to both of them, I know I said that classical music was based in what was popular in Western culture and the traditions there, but we have composers and we have performers from all across the world and all different cultures that write classical music and that write popular music. And in the same way that we have all different kinds of people writing that music, we have all different kinds of people playing that music and all different kinds of ensembles. So like this week, you're going to hear the Belin Quartet, which is a string quartet, play both things that are classical and traditionally written for string quartet, but also things that weren't originally written for string quartet. Now, when we talk about the things that make these two things different, so what's different between classical and popular music, classical music and that term of classical music, it categorizes music that's been around for a really long period of time, whereas popular music, that I found out the original term popular music became used more in like 80s, and it was called like the era where it came about was called the Tin Pan Alley in the US. So that's kind of cool. Classical music also, because it uses those traditions, traditionally had people who had classical music training making it, whereas popular music doesn't need to have people who have training creating it. I think you even see that on YouTube. There are a lot of people who get really famous and they have taught themselves how to play the guitar or play the drums. And then another thing, classical music, partially because it's been around for so long, when people were first sharing it, a lot of times it was done in a live audience setting or in someone's home, like chamber music here in someone's home, having fun playing together. Whereas the popular music industry, they recorded it, and we had like the radio come about so people could share these recordings, and they got mass popularity because so many people had access to them. There are good and bad things about both categories. I'll say, even as a person who plays a lot of classical music, I really like listening to both types of music. And there are certain categories within each that I prefer over others. So if you're a person who maybe you thought you only liked popular music, I really challenge you to listen to some more things, because I bet you would find something in the classical music category that you could find just as interesting as something you'd hear on the radio today. So we talked about some of the basic differences between classical and popular music. That was our goal number one. Let's talk about some of the people you're going to meet this week, some of our composers. So let's review, what is a composer? I know those of you who've been watching every week diligently, you already know this, but a composer is a person who writes or composes music. The term compose is what we use for creating music. And we talk about these folks because it helps us understand them a little bit more. It's fun to learn about their backgrounds or any cool stories relating to them. I think it helps me listen to their music better, because then I understand why they might have created it in the first place. So the first one we're going to talk about, his name is Antonio Vivaldi, and he is a very, very popular composer. People love his music. He lived from 1678 to 1741. That's during the Baroque era. But again, Baroque, part of the classical music genre. In addition to being a composer, he was also a Roman Catholic priest, which is kind of interesting. That's not something that all composers did, but that was something that was really important to him. A little bit more about him. He played the violin. He was a violin virtuoso, which I think is part of why a lot of his music, he has some very popular pieces of music that have really hard violin parts, very important violin parts and solos. And as he was a Roman Catholic priest, he also worked at an orphanage. And this orphanage was like an all-girls school, or it had all-girls ensembles in it. And so he would write music for those ensembles. And that's where a lot of his really popular pieces of music that we play today, he actually wrote for his students there, which I think is really cool. One of the things you're going to hear this week are a couple movements from his Four Seasons, which I'm sure would have been played by the girls at the school. We talked about Antonio Vivaldi. Now let's talk about someone really different. This person's name is Georges Bizet. He lived after Vivaldi died, so 1838 to 1875, from France. So Vivaldi was from Italy. This man was from France. He composed during the Romantic era. Again, still classical music, but the Romantic era is a smaller portion of that. A little bit more about him. He played the piano, and apparently he went to the Paris Conservatory at age 10. So he was a very good pianist. I read some things where piano is not something that he made a big deal out of. He apparently could have gone around playing piano, but instead kind of kept it to himself. But he could like sit down at a party and play something perfectly and wow everyone who was there. So that's kind of cool. Apparently, as he was working and living, so he would write music, he was a composer, but in order to pay the bills, we've noticed throughout time, some of the composers, they had other jobs too. So some composers worked at churches. That's probably why Vivaldi was a priest as well. That was a source of income for him, a place to live. But Bizet, in addition to writing his own music, would also make arrangements of things. And arrangements are really important. A lot of the music you're going to hear this week, they're arrangements of the original thing. So arranged so that a string quartet could play it. And that's what Bizet would do as well. When I think of Bizet, one of the things I think of is a piece you're actually going to hear this week. And it's a piece from his opera Carmen. And Carmen is a really interesting opera. I'll tell you a little bit more about it later. But these types of songs, even though they were in the classical music realm, I think they have a lot of things that make them very popular and easy to latch onto because they have fun melodies and things that you'll just walk away humming. All right, we talked about Vivaldi, talked about Bizet. Let's go on to another fun composer, and that person is George Gershwin. Gershwin lived after Bizet, so we have three very different people in terms of when they lived. And Gershwin also is from America, so Brooklyn, New York. He lived from 1889 to 1937. And something I think is really interesting about George Gershwin is when we talk about the different genres of music and types of music, he was a composer who was absolutely classically trained, and he used some of those styles and structures that we talk about being important in classical music. But he also then wrote pop music. He wrote popular music. And he lived around that time of 1880 when Tin Pan Alley was a thing that I talked about earlier. And so his music, I think, does a great job of bridging this gap of, do I like classical? Do I like popular? You can like both. And this is a composer who did both and did both really, really well. A little bit more about Gershwin. In his music, so he composed in what we consider the 20th century, but a lot of his music incorporates things like jazz. So you hear a lot of jazz elements in it. Something he's really well known for is this piece called Rhapsody in Blue. It's very jazzy, it's piano with full orchestra. He also would take the styles that he loved from classical music, though, and like styles that composers he really admired used, and he would put his own style into those too. So he still used some of these older techniques, but with music that he loved, rhythms that he loved. Something I think is really cool, he won an Academy Award for Best Original Song, and apparently has won a bunch of awards posthumously, which means after he died, he still was winning awards. And when I hear that a composer is winning things like an Academy Award, I love that because I hear the Academy Awards and I think, oh, that's something that honors what's really popular in culture. And it's cool to see classical musicians being honored in popular culture as well. All right, we talked about those three composers, Vivaldi, Bizet, and Gershwin. Let's talk about some of the pieces you're going to hear this week. I will say I'm not telling you about all of them. I want you to tune in and listen because there's going to be some really great ones. I wanted to highlight some composers that maybe you hadn't heard of before and talk about their pieces because I bet when you listen to the concert, you're going to hear some things you do recognize too. So first thing we're going to talk about is the Four Seasons by Vivaldi. The quartet is going to play a couple of the movements from this. And what I love about these Four Seasons is they absolutely make me feel like I'm in that season. So apparently when they first got published, Vivaldi published them with sonnets, which are kind of like little poems that talked about each of the seasons. So like in summer, you can hear a big thunderstorm that happens. In one of the seasons, you can actually, there's a part where you can hear a dog barking. It's played by the viola. That is why I know that. And all of these, they have really big violin solos. They're kind of designed to be like a violin concerto in some ways, but there are solos in the other parts of the orchestra too. Definitely one of the more famous classical pieces of music that is out there. A lot of people have heard these Four Seasons, and they're really fun to listen to. I always tell my students, they're kind of like what was rock and roll back in the day. There's a lot of like big rhythms. It's really energetic sometimes. So even if classical music isn't the thing you normally listen to, I bet you would like these. Next, I want to talk to you about Carmen by Bizet. So Carmen was an opera. It was set in Spain. The main character, one of the main characters, named Carmen. She was a gypsy. But what they're going to play is a small snippet that was kind of like an interlude in between things, and it's a really pretty melody. Obviously, you're not going to hear the whole opera. That'd be very long. So this is just a small snippet to get you to go back and want to listen to some more. And then there are also going to be a couple of songs, Summertime and I Got Rhythm, that are by Gershwin. And both of these, even though they're from different things, they're both songs by him. So originally they had words. I don't think you're going to have someone singing the words along for this, but if you look up the lyrics ahead of time, that might give you another idea of what was happening in those songs. One of them is actually from an opera that he wrote called Porgy and Bess. But just like Gershwin's style, there's going to be a lot of cool rhythms, some jazzy vibes. So if you like jazz, I bet you'll like this too. Some other composers you're going to hear things by the Beatles. Yes, they were composers. They wrote music. You'll hear things by Queen, Scott Joplin, Leroy Anderson. So it's going to be a really diverse program, lots of variety of different styles and composers. So we talked about a lot. Time to go back and review, see if we met our goals. So goal number 1 was, I can describe the difference between classical and popular music. Now, I don't expect you to be able to tell me everything about those two styles of music. They're such broad terms, but I wanted to give you a little idea of what the differences and the similarities are between the two. And then goal number 2, I can compare and contrast composers Vivaldi, Bizet, and Gershwin. Very different men that lived at different times in different parts of the world, but all wrote really beautiful music that I think you'll love. Thanks so much for joining us.
All right. So just like in past weeks, we have an activity that you can do while you're listening to the concert. So if you would like to download that activity and fill it out, you can head to our website and click on education. And there's a worksheet. You can listen to the music that you're hearing and actually be kind of a reviewer, decide which one you like best. And if you let us know what you have done, maybe take a selfie, you can send it to info@civicmusic.org and you'll be entered to win free tickets to one of our concerts this season. Remember, tune into the concert. That's why we do this, to give you some information about a really great free concert that'll be happening. And that takes place tomorrow, Wednesday at 6 p.m. Same way that you watch this, you can watch the Belin Quartet perform some really great audience favorites. Thanks so much for joining us today.